I should start by saying that I loved my daughter, despite what happened. I didn't mean for things to end up the way they did. Eileen was a beautiful and amazingly talented young girl. She was as sweet as they came, too. Always on her best behavior, always using her best manners, and all around was an absolute angel. She always used to love sports when she was little, and was always excelling in that too. When she was little, I used to take her with me to my friend's house to watch the football games every Sunday. Sometimes we'd throw a few passes in the front yard back and forth to each other. As she grew up, she seemed to have a fondness for sports, so me and her mother began finding and plugging her into different athletic clubs. Girls' soccer, after-school football clubs, stuff like that. Eventually, in middle school, she started trying out for stuff like the girls' football team. She always got the spot, and got to be very good at it too. Through it all, I always saw her as my little star. I took pride that my daughter was, essentially, my mini-me. Actually, it wasn't a stretch to say she outdid me in more than a few ways. See, at her age, I too was all about athletics. Football, wrestling, and even did some time running track. But whereas I was none too bothered with much else in life, say my schooling for example, and would let my grades go to shit, Eileen was every bit the driven pro star I was, and still took home nothing less than B's on her report cards. I could always see her getting a full ride through a prestigious university on some sort of athletics scholarship. And that's another thing. Everyone she tried out for, football, soccer, track, and even fencing, she excelled at. I say all of this to say that I was a proud papa. But of course, it wouldn't always be this way. I remember it starting back in her freshman year of high school. She was playing defense in her first high school football game of the year. She kept a rock-solid stance, just like I'd always taught her. I could see it in her eyes. She was determined that no one was getting past her. Unfortunately, the 5'9" behemoth with the ball in her arms had other plans, and rammed Eileen at full speed, sending her flying almost 2 yard lines. I remember how me, as well as at least half the crowd, flinched when we saw that. Like we were the ones that got hit. But shock slowly turned into panic when we saw that she hadn't gotten back up from the 60-yard line. She laid on the 60-yard line, writhing and clutching her legs. I couldn't hear her, but I could see that she was screaming. I bolted from my seat and ran out onto the field when I saw a team of first responders rush out onto the field about 10 minutes later and have to carry her out on a stretcher. When I got to her, she was horrified and she clutched her legs, screaming, "I can't move my legs!" Me and my wife, Wendy, immediately rushed to the hospital, where we were told that she'd suffered a severe spinal fracture at her lower back. They told us that while it wasn't as bad as most, there was still only a slim chance she'd ever walk again, and even then, it wasn't likely that she'd be able to play any kind of sports anymore. This was, among other things, devastating. Devastating to Eileen, who immediately burst into hysterics when she heard this, as well as to me. I tried not to show it, but yes, that did get to me. Her being the family athlete, taking up my mantle, was every bit as much my hope and dreams as much as it was hers. I know how utterly selfish and short-sighted that sounds, but it was true. I couldn't help it. Despite this, I'd like to think I always tried to reinforce that I'd always love her and be proud of her, sports or no sports. Things were pretty ugly for a while after that. Eileen, who used to be one of the most hyper-social and outgoing people you'd ever meet, became isolated, closed off. Where before, me and Wendy would be damn near exhausting ourselves, though happily obliging, to get her everywhere she was wanting to go. Now, we were struggling to even get her to come out of her room to eat dinner with us. School and her room. Those were the only two places she'd be. And she'd rarely ever speak to us any time in between. Though we were able to get her into physical therapy, she was very slow to make progress. I could see she lacked the motivation to recover. I guess she figured, like I did, shamefully deep down. What was the point? She couldn't compete anymore. She couldn't accomplish her dreams of being an all-star athlete. So why bother healing? This kept me and Wendy tossing every night, unable to really sleep. On top of trying our best to accommodate her through most mundane tasks, we were always so worried that our daughter was going to essentially waste away because of her refusal to heal or move on. This made us bitter, not only with ourselves, not only with other people, but soon, we became toxic with each other. I'd barely speak or even really look at Wendy for long periods of time. Anytime she wanted to speak to me, it was usually just to stress me out about how Eileen wasn't getting any better. Sometimes even blatantly blaming me for her drop in morale. I never usually said anything when she did this. What could I have said? She may as well have been right. She was right then, just like she would be right about me again later on. It was all my fault. Eventually, she was able to gain a little bit of use in her legs again, though she still required the use of a cane and walked with a noticeable limp. She also couldn't be on her feet for prolonged periods of time. But it was still progress nonetheless. With this, she began to slowly regain a slight fragment of the person she once was. She still wasn't as perky or expressive as she was before, but I could see certain improvements in her behavior. Her face also seemed to lighten a bit, mood-wise. While she didn't say much, she slowly began interacting with me and Wendy again. It was usually just, "Hey," or "I love you," with the occasional summary of how her school day was. After 3 months, Eileen was more or less better. She'd never be the same though, and I knew that. I knew it, but I guess I never really accepted it. I guess it's like toxic nostalgia, isn't it? You remember something so fondly, fixating on it, that you'll find yourself unable to accept and adapt when things are different. You become so obsessed with the way things were that you detest the way things are now. And because of that, you try and force things to go back to the way they used to be. Well, anyway, she was actually improving. She was getting better, while I essentially took her place as the one wasting away. While I could see her being able to move on, finding other ways to utilize her time and actually be productive, I never really tried to take the time to acknowledge it. From my perspective, she may as well have not gotten better at all. She still spent so much time in her room, away from us or the outside world. Anytime I'd get curious enough to ask, she'd always reply with, "I'm really busy with an important project." The same would be said whenever I tried to get her to do something, anything with me. It got to me, sure, but I did my damnedest not to let it show. At one point, I found out that these projects of hers were actually a new hobby she'd taken up, one that didn't involve her having to leave the house. Online gaming. I remember glancing into her room one day as I passed down the hallway to see her nose buried in a computer game. She seemed focused on it, fixated even, like how she used to be with her athletics. This would actually occur a few times, me walking by to catch her devoting hours of energy and determination to that game. I told Wendy about it, telling her about how devoted she was to this game. I told her that I didn't think it was healthy, this new obsession of hers. But Wendy told me that she didn't think trying to force her to stop was a good idea. "She's finally happy again, Walter. You really want to take that away from her?" As much as I wanted to argue with that, how could I? For the most part, she was right. So instead, I just bore with it as best I could. That was, until we saw her grades in school begin slipping. What were constant A's and B's with maybe an occasional C began to become almost the complete opposite. It was when her last report, the second to last one of the year, came in the mail and I saw that it was largely made up of C's and D's, and even a couple of F's, that I had to put my foot down and do something. Something I regret now, 6 months later, and will continue to regret as long as I'm still alive. I went to pick her up from school like I usually did. This time, though, I didn't try to say anything like, "How was your day?" or anything like that. Not that it really seemed to matter to her. Even still, I think even she knew, despite saying nothing about it, that something was up. When we got home, before she could bunker herself into her room, I stopped her. "Got something you mind explaining to me?" I said sternly. She looked at me, confused. She looked like she almost genuinely didn't know what I could have been alluding to, so I held up her report card. "It's just poor eyesight, right? Brought on by old age?" Because I can't seem to think of any other reason why I'm looking at this piece of paper here and seeing what looks like D's and an F? Her confusion instantly transformed into one of shock, before then sinking into one of panic. It looked to me like this was all just as much news to her as it was to me, seeing it. I don't," she stammered. "I don't know. Didn't know what? That your grades were going in the toilet? I went over to the trash can, still purposefully not taken out for this reason, and pulled out the report cards from the last semester and held them up. Now do you see? So let's try this again. Why are your grades that could have made you top of your classes, all of a sudden looking like those of a dropout? She stood frozen, wide-eyed and slack-jawed, struggling to try and say something. Anything. I don't know. I thought it was fine. I've been busy with that game, I blurted, interrupting her. Her eyes opened even wider. She must have thought I still didn't know about her special project. Yeah, that's right. I've seen what you've been doing. So, let me get the story straight here. You've been screwing around on that computer game instead of focusing on your schoolwork? I'm sorry, she mumbled. But it's important, Dad. I felt my blood start boiling. Important? It's a video game. How the hell is that more important than your grades, huh? Explain that to me. No, I really want to know. She seemed at a complete loss for words. She started shaking a bit. I'd scared her. It's not just a... Then what is it, huh? What is it and how does it justify your grades? It's a special project, Dad. And it's becoming popular online. I can't explain it, but... That tore it. Alright, you know what? Enough of this. Kiss your damn computer goodbye. I tried to let this go, but clearly that was a mistake. Immediately, her face went pale. Wait! She cried. Dad, you can't! It's a special project, please! I stomped my way past her to her room. She tried to give chase, hobbling behind me as fast as she could. Dad, stop! Please! I ignored her. I was beyond bargaining at that point. I was hellbent on that computer getting thrown out the fucking window. I made it to the room first and slammed the door, locking it, before starting to unplug and dismantle the CPU tower. Dad, stop! What are you doing? Her voice was absolutely hysterical, and she pounded on the door furiously. I continued yanking loose all of the plugs gracelessly. My heart was racing, with anger, adrenaline, and with the sense of triumph. I was ridding myself of the source of my disappointment. Now Eileen could go back to being my smart, successful little girl and quit wasting herself away with a fucking game. After I'd yanked the CPU loose, I proceeded to smash it repeatedly into the floor. I remember hearing Eileen scream behind the door with every impact on the floor. I ignored it. I ignored that, and I ignored the knocking sounds getting louder and louder and more violent. Soon, her shrieking and banging died down, and I could hear her loudly bawling behind the door. I stood up and took a deep breath. The computer was totaled, with small glass and metal pieces and wires scattered across the floor. I felt proud of myself. I had done it. The computer, the distraction was no more. I'd have my Eileen back. I opened the door, seeing her crumpled up on the floor, sobbing. She shrieked again when she saw what remained of her computer, and immediately sprang up, throwing herself into the middle of the pile of shattered circuit boards and wires, and began hugging them close to her chest. I simply kept walking, satisfied I'd done the right thing. The rest of the day, I spent alone, thinking about what I'd just done. I actually began to wonder if I'd overreacted. Yeah, her grades were bad and all, but did I really have to go and break her computer like that? I started thinking about what Eileen was saying about not just being a game, about it being a special project. That led me to wonder just what actually was this project. Deep down, I began to get the feeling there was something more that I wasn't seeing. Funny how regret works, isn't it? Sometimes it doesn't sink in until much later. And sometimes, such as it was with me, until it was far too late. It had gotten late, and Wendy was going to be home in an hour, so I began preparing supper. By then, I'd composed myself again and decided I'd try to bury the hatchet with Eileen after dinner. I even decided to make her favorite for dinner: mozzarella-filled lasagna and bratwursts. Admittedly, I'd hoped to have caught her attention with the aroma. Sort of an early, "Look, I might have been a bit too harsh, I'm sorry," type of deal, you know? But nope, dead silent. Just let her blow off some steam, I thought, continuing to make dinner. I heard the front door open and Wendy come in right as I was pulling the lasagna out of the oven. "Hey, honey bun, welcome home. You're right on time for supper." "Oh, thank God, I'm starving. Had to work through lunch again. What you making?" "Mozzarella lasagna." "Oh, Eileen'll love that." "Well, I figured it's the least I could do." "What do you mean?" I pulled out the report card and showed it to her. "I had to say something to her," I began. She'd apparently been so caught up with that game that her grades had been going in the toilet. I then showed her the previous report cards to reinforce my point. She looked at me with a nervous expression. "Oh God, what did you do?" "I took her computer away until her grades came back up," I lied. She glanced towards her bedroom. "Look, what was I supposed to do? Let her keep failing?" She looked at me in disapproval. "It'll be fine, I promise. I'm gonna talk to her after dinner and make nice, and everything will be just fine." She looked back to the room again. "Well, I'm gonna go check up on her." She then walked down the hall to her room. "Let her know supper's ready," I called out, heading back into the kitchen. What came next happened so quickly, yet so slowly at the same time. It was like everything was put into slow motion. I remember my heart almost stopping dead, 2 steps from the threshold between the kitchen and the dining room, when I heard Wendy let out the most horrified scream I'd ever heard. I remember being stuck in a shock-induced paralysis for about a solid 10 seconds. "Walter! Oh my God, Walter, come quick! Eileen, she's... Oh my God!" That's when I finally broke from my stupor and all but fell to the hallway, Wendy was on her knees in front of Eileen's open room, hands covering her mouth and quivering. My blood went ice cold when I looked in the room. The room was dark, but there was just enough moonlight filtering from her window to illuminate the most haunting scene I'd ever seen. It was Eileen. She laid out in the middle of the floor, still littered with the broken computer parts. Her eyes were wide open and staring up at the ceiling, lifeless. I ran over to her and cradled her in my arms. Eileen! Eileen! Oh Jesus, Eileen! I started shaking her. Eileen, come on, baby, wake up. Come on, please, wake up. She stared back up at me with her empty eyes. Her skin was cold, and I retracted in horror when I tried shaking her arm. I felt something wet, and when I turned on the light, I damn near vomited. In one hand was a shard of one of the circuit boards. Her arms were opened wide, across their lengths, and I saw that blood had pooled around her. I turned to Wendy and shouted for her to call 911. For a second, she didn't move, just staring back at me in shock. Damn it! Get the ambulance on the phone! She broke and ran into the living room to the phone. I just sat there, crying, hyperventilating while cradling and pathetically trying to shake my daughter awake. It was about 20 minutes later that the paramedics arrived. 2 police officers and a paramedic had to pry me away from her. No, let me go! I shouted, struggling to keep from being separated from her. Eventually, they got me out of the bedroom and into the living room where sat my wife. After a moment, they questioned us as to what led up to this point. They asked if there was any history of mental illness or violence in the family. No. Did either of you have a fight or something? Possibly getting physical? No, I exclaimed. No, we haven't ever fought. Not like that. What about a dispute? I was confused. I couldn't see how that was relevant. No. Look, I took her computer away because her grades were failing. I didn't hurt her. The other officer pulled out a piece of paper and handed it to me. This was found with your daughter's body. I took it and read it. I'm sorry for wasting my life, Dad. I thought I could make something that would make you proud of me, like how I've made the rest of the world happy. I was wrong, though. I'm a failure. You deserve better. This time I couldn't stop myself. I threw up right where I stood. I couldn't believe what I'd just read. It was all my fault. Wendy immediately howled in grief when she saw this. I looked to the officers and stammered. I didn't know. They looked at each other and back to me. I swear I didn't ever try to hurt her. You fucking bastard! Wendy shrieked. This is your fault! You did this! I told you she was happy, and you took it away! I was trying to... To what? To get her to be what you wanted her to be? She was trying to make you proud, but it wasn't good enough for you, was it? I clammed up. I couldn't say anything. Like I said, she was right then, just like she was right before. One of the officers stepped in and led Wendy away, while the other stayed behind with me. I stayed speechless for a moment. The officer questioned me about the argument between me and Eileen, and I told him the truth. That I'd taken away her computer by smashing it because of her grades. Things sort of went through the motions after that. Sometime later, the officer that was with Wendy rejoined his partner and informed me that Wendy herself had called for a friend of hers to pick her up and that she'd be staying the night there. Not long after that, the paramedics wheeled Eileen's body out of the room. Finally, everyone else left and things were quiet again. Far too quiet. I was alone, and it was dead silent. Several things happened to me all at once. I started laughing, which then turned into a rage fit, where I began hitting the walls and knocking over everything in sight. Finally, exhausted both physically and mentally, I finally collapsed and began bawling. For the next 2 days, I didn't see or hear from Wendy. I didn't exactly bother trying to reach out either, because I guess I knew what was coming. When she did come back, she told me, plain and clear, that it was over. She spent the rest of the day packing bags of stuff she knew was hers, and hers alone. I just watched. Of course I wanted to argue, to beg her to stay. But I didn't. I accepted that this was what I deserved. The next month or so was spent like this. Wendy moving her stuff out of the house, as well as going through legalities to finalize the divorce. During this, Wendy agreed that I could have the house, claiming she just couldn't stand to be in the place anymore after what happened, and that she only wanted her half of the money in our joint bank account. So that was that. I was alone in an empty house, without my wife or my daughter. And worst of all, I couldn't blame anyone but myself. It was all my fault. I don't remember a whole lot of what happened the next few weeks after that night. I couldn't sleep very well, I remember that. But so much time seemed to fly by in a blur that I couldn't keep up with it. I remember spending most nights in the bar, mostly just so I wouldn't have to be alone in the house. And of course, this led to a lot of nights being spent blacked out. It was last night, however, that I met Emmett. I remember he was sitting on the stool next to me, and he turned and asked me if I'd heard of some new computer game that was going viral. He looked like what you'd expect a guy who spends most of his life with that shit would. Overweight, dirty-looking clothes that reeked of pizza and chicken wings, raggedy-looking hair and a long, unkempt beard, and was even wearing his headset around his neck. I looked at him, wondering what impression I gave off that made him think I gave the better part of 2 shits. "Yeah, man," he went on, clearly not getting the message. "It's called Heart and Soul Online. Bro, you haven't heard of it? You gotta check it out. You play as this angel, right? A fallen angel, like Lucifer, you know? And you complete different quests to try and, get back into heaven. I stared blankly at him. The way he was talking, mixed with what he was saying about this game, caused my mind to scramble. Yeah, and word has it, it's cursed. I cocked my eyebrows at him. Cursed? I asked, slurring. I was knee-deep into my 10th round of Harwood Canadian, which didn't help my mood or my ability to comprehend what he was going on about. Yeah, I see how it's affecting you, I retorted, now pissed drunk. He rambled for another 10 minutes about how this game came out only a few months ago, in pre-beta stage. Whatever the hell that was supposed to mean. And that it was never finished. That it supposedly stole the soul of the creator before it was finished. Yeah, it's been all over GameSpot and IGN. They say that the creator's ghost is now trapped in the game, and if you play it for long enough, it'll assimilate your soul too. He made his eyes go big. When he said this like I was a little kid he was trying to scare with his hokey ghost story. Listen, pal, I blurted. I'm not in the fucking mood for bullshit like this. So just leave me alone. This seemed to finally get through to him, and he threw up his hands and said, Sorry, man, just thought you could use a distraction from life, you know? You look like you could use it. Name's Emmett, by the way. Seriously, though, check it out. If you dare. He chucked before getting up and waddling his way out of the bar. I ended up leaving almost immediately after. The horrible odor from Emmett tearing my nose apart and ruining any further interest in the liquor for the night. On the walk home, for whatever reason, I couldn't get it out of my mind. Despite it obviously being some load of shit he ripped off the internet like most everything else guys like him get their information from. Something was striking some sort of chord with me. Now, I've never been into video games, obviously. Hell, I'd never even touched a controller, and I wasn't a tech wizard either. Like I said, I was always more the outdoorsy type. But, I guess because like Emmett said, I needed a distraction. I couldn't stop thinking about what he'd said about a cursed game. In the end, I decided to look into it a bit more. Why not? What else was I supposed to do with my downtime in an empty house, alone, without any family? When I got home, at around 12:30 a.m., still a good bit drunk, I decided to try and look up this supposedly cursed game. Using my laptop, I typed in Heart and Soul, Curse, half expecting nothing to come up. Surprisingly, there were actually a good couple of articles talking about it. Most of them were from gaming websites, as well as a couple of threads from various social media platforms talking about it. Skimming briefly over these, I saw that most of them were singing the game's praises, talking about how immersive and engaging the game and its plot were. Finally, I'd found what I was looking for. It was a post titled, Mysterious Game, Heart and Soul Online. I clicked on it, sending me to a post on IGN.com that talked about the game being a hit MMORPG on Steam. It was, according to the post, gaining mass amounts of popularity when it was released in beta stage, only about 6 months ago. Apparently though, It was never finished, and the creator never reached out or responded to any of the fan mail. Rumor mills then kicked into overdrive about what happened to the game and its creator. Soon after, the so-called curse of Heart and Soul Online was born. At least, that's what I read on the page. From there were posts damn near novel length about how the soul of the creator apparently haunts the game, and the game will slowly steal your soul until you become trapped as well. A few of the posts had snapshots of the game with threads titled "Ghost Found in Heart and Soul Online," or something bizarre like that. A few were posts made about players who apparently were comatose after playing the game, having had their soul stolen by the game, as they put it. Even drunk, I knew stupid when I saw it. The shit people come up with these days, I thought, continuing to scroll through. I stopped though, when I saw that there was a download link to the game on Steam. The cover art of the game was of what looked like an angel from a Renaissance painting, clutching a bleeding heart. I looked through the different images for the game. It appeared to be indeed a game where you play as some angelic-looking creature, and you run around this little fantasy world. One of the photos was labeled, "Can you regain the All-Father's grace?" There was no sort of trailer or anything for the game, so I decided to skim the comments section to see if anyone had any information there. It was more or less the same as the forums though, with a few more wild stories about the curse as well. Finally, seeing that it was listed as free, I decided, screw it, and clicked the download button. Now again, I don't know anything about how long games are supposed to take to download, but this took almost 15 to 20 to download to my laptop. Hi everyone. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. I'd like to give thanks to Corpse Child for allowing me to read this on the channel. It just so happens that they have released a book depicting their work on Amazon, called Damned Whispers, available now. I've posted a link in the description, so if you'd like to check it out, please do. Anyways, I look forward to releasing the final part of this story, but for now, thanks again for watching. Take care.